Imagine having access to every police incident in Norway. Now, imagine turning that into a real working application in no time. Sounds impossible? Let's give it a try. So this is going to be real-time development with real data and real challenges. Ready to see how AI-assisted development can supercharge your coding? Let's dive in. Hi, Alex here from Grit AI Studio. Today I'm going to show you how we ideate and build the Grit AI way. So I figured it was time to do a build with me video, so let's see if we can turn raw police incident data into something cool, all while letting AI do the heavy lifting for us. Let's jump straight in. Last week, I saw someone on LinkedIn post a map of Norway showing police incidents using public data from the Norwegian police, and I figured that would be a great starting point for a build session. So the plan today is we're going to use the Swagger API documentation from the police to brainstorm ideas. And once we have some good ideas, we're going to feed that into Bolt to get us a starting point. And then lastly, we're going to use Cursor to connect everything up against the real data and hopefully get us a working MVP. We've got the access to the Swagger description, the Swagger file for the API, and I figured this could be a great starting point for this build session. Oftentimes, you'll start with an idea where you're coming up with the idea and then figuring out what data you need afterwards. But for a lot of enterprises and a lot of businesses, you'll be sitting on a lot of data and trying to figure out what could I use this data for. So I think this is a good example of an approach where you can use AI to do some clever prompting to get started in the ideation process. And then we'll move on to actually doing it. So let's see, we're going to start with this. And I like to use the Anthropic Console when I build out prompts. And you can, of course, watch a video that we made on the Anthropic Console. I'll leave a link in the description. So in this case, I'm going to use it to just quickly create a prompt for interpreting the Swagger file and then actually brainstorming for me. Now, of course, you would do this once and have it saved as a bookmark, but I'm going to show you, a very quick version of how I could do this. So I would go to generate the prompt. I'll just get the link from the API and let's just say that we want to create a system prompt that takes a Swagger file or an API description. And then we needed to obviously analyze this file. It would be nice to have a description of data that we can access. And then you could use this to essentially come up with an entire application idea, let's call it that, but I'm gonna be a bit more specific and just assume that the idea is to actually use data from the Norwegian police, and we're gonna build a dashboard, but I would like some inspiration on what type of widgets or visualizations that we can use on this dashboard. So let's just say that we wanted to come up with some widgets or visualizations. Let's start there. And then you can, of course, always iterate on that prompt and use the Anthropic Console for that. But let's just start here and let's not spend too much time on this. What it generates is essentially the role description and some context, and then it will expect the API documentation or the Swagger file, and then it provides these instructions that it should analyze the API documentation, provide us with a description, including some of the key endpoints and data available. And then lastly, of course, generate these 10 ideas. And then it suggests to do it in a specific format. So again, grabbing that URL, we're going to test run this. We're going to provide the URL and then we're going to run that and see what it comes up with. So essentially just run a prompt and get the descriptions. And then you can also, of course, always go in and verify and drill into it if you want to. But this is a perfect way to get started. And then it comes up with some ideas. So let's have a look at what the ideas are. So we've got a live interactive incident map. That's, of course, a good idea. We also have some district activity heat map. There's some statistical things like category distribution. There's time of day activity, recent events. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do here. Response time. That could be interesting as well. I'm going to make a note that I like at least the map. We definitely need to do a map. So I'm going to just write that down over here. So we're going to do a map, but maybe not live incident map. Let's sort of do something like this. So let's do like a statistical stats map. Yeah, that's a good idea. And then let's do categories is always good. Pie chart or it could be a bar chart, but yeah, let's do that. Recent events, yeah, that's probably useful. Okay, let's see if we can get some more ideas. And of course, you can also take this prompt now and try a different engine. So you could run it in ChatGPT or even Perplexity if you want to do that, or DeepSeek. So, that's up to you. And just essentially say, instead of this as actually setting it up as a system prompt, I'm just going to provide it in here, okay? And then let's see what we get. A lot of the same ideas, but also some variations. Incident alert system. Yeah, so maybe we could do something around sort of the latest, just to have like what's ongoing and what's the most recent incident. So let's do that as well. I'm just making a little note here. Great. So we've got a map, we've got some stats in a chart, and a list of the most recent incidents. There's obviously a lot more we could do, but let's just do that to get started. So let's then try to create a prompt with Bolt based on these 3 ideas for widgets. So we have our interactive incident map, our priority monitor for the latest incidents, and then we have our category chart. We're going to use the enhance prompt. We need to review that very carefully, so that it's not adding more complexity than we desire or adding things or libraries that we don't like. So for some reason, sometimes it suggests one version, sometimes a different version. Here now it's saying Next.js 13. I would definitely say we should do 14 and higher. We do want to use app router. We want to have responsive design, definitely. We should probably also say we would like to have dark mode. That's always nice. Yeah, as you can see here now, it's essentially opening up for more alternatives, which I highly recommend that you avoid. So, it might say Mapbox or Leaf.js, but I would say let's use Mapbox for this case. Maybe we simplify it a bit and just say color-coded clustering group by municipality on the map. Yeah. And let's just do then, since this is going to be a statistical map, let's just do like number of incidents in that region. For our priority alert monitor, let's say create a real-time feed of high priority incidents. We don't need sound notifications. That's probably overdoing it for an MVP. Create an interactive bar chart using, here I'm going to remove the choice and just say, let's just use chart.js. Well, that sounds like a good starting point. Let's try that. So this is a typical example of actually, it creating things in sequence and then actually not running everything again as a second pass through. So here it should be able to fix it simply by clicking attempt fix. So let's see if it's able to do so. At least we're seeing a starting point. We're obviously not seeing a map because we do need to add our Mapbox token to actually see the map. And we're not seeing our chart for some reason. But beyond that, we do have some components here. It's decided to use a menu on the side here. It's got some filter capabilities. It's got the theme selector up here. There's a space for some alerts. So it's a good starting point. And then you can see that it's added more of these widgets. So the map at the beginning, then we've got our priority alerts, and then we have our chart, which shows the different categories. And it's even come up with a creative way to show 2 periods compared against one another. So that's a good starting point. Rather than spend too much time here, of course, now you could, start iterating on the different modules and the components, and we could start struggling with this problem and trying to fix that. Instead of doing that, I'm actually now going to export this project. I'm happy with this as a starting point. So let's do that. We're gonna take this and then we're gonna download it and open it in Cursor. Okay, so let's open our project in Cursor. We've downloaded it now from Bolt, and as you can see, we've got our files. We had some issues in Bolt, but let's see if we can fix that. The first thing we do is we're gonna run npm install or whatever package manager you're using, and then you'll see the problem that we also saw in Bolt is that it's using different versions, some outdated, some deprecated. So the quickest way, again, I would never do this if it wasn't for the fact that this is a fresh project which I have no real relation to at all. So in this case, what we would do is we're just going to use the audit fix function, and then we're going to ultimately do the force function to ensure that we are on the right and updated version of all our dependencies. So let's just do the force one. We should be good now. So that's a good starting point for us. So now let's just try to run it without even looking at the code. So we're going to do npm run dev. And then we're going to open this in our browser. So now we can see actually the dashboard in full screen width, where it's actually put our alerts on the right-hand side, and then our map, which is currently not displaying. And then we've got our categories of the different incidents at the bottom of the screen, which is pretty cool as a starting point. Now, these things will probably not work, and if I start clicking on them, they will probably crash. So let's just try that. Yeah, definitely gonna crash. But that's fine. Let's just go back to the start, and you'll notice we have one error here, and that's probably at least our Mapbox token missing, which you can see, yeah, failed to fetch Mapbox. So we're gonna start by fixing that just to get a fresh, clean starting point with no errors. So I'm gonna go back into Cursor. What I normally would do is I would create a .env.local file. And of course, you should never commit this to Git or anything like that. So that's your local file. What I would start with, since this is a Next.js project, I would always add this next public base URL. And as you can see, Cursor is already starting to propose things for me. And that's the Cursor tab feature. We'll do a separate video on Cursor and give you a proper introduction to everything. And then we need to add our Mapbox token. And the way to do that is we're going to add in this next public Mapbox token. So once that's done, we have our map token. We will see that our project is refreshing and recompiling due to the new environmental variables that we just defined. And then we can go back to our browser. We'll hit refresh. And there we go. Now we actually see a map. Doesn't show anything, and obviously there isn't any real data here at this stage, but that's a pretty good start. Now, next step is to add our data and connect to our API. So let's do that. So I'm going to start a new composer window. I'm going to just clean the history out, because I found that once you have a very long composer history, it might start to get confusing for the AI with mixing up historical discussions or things you've been resolving. So I recommend once in a while, once you sort of complete one part, you would do a new composer window. Okay, so a couple of things before we jump into everything. So best practices that I apply is, one, I always add my cursor rules to the project. That helps me avoid a lot of the common issues that you'll experience if you don't use any cursor rules. It's as simple as adding a .cursor rule file to the project, or you could also in your cursor settings define it. So you can write it in here if you want to, or you can use the cursor rules file here. I'm gonna drag my cursor rules file into the project. So I'm gonna do that. This is my cursor rule file. You can find a bunch of inspiration for cursor rule files, but there are certain things that, I've experienced that it, tends to do that annoys me. And then I just chug it into cursor rules to avoid spending time on that every time. Since we're using TypeScript, there's quite often issues relating to type checking and not conforming to type checking. So that's something that I try my best to describe in the cursor rules. For instance, I don't want it to leave to-dos or placeholders or missing code. I don't want it to be lazy. I also want it to follow best practices. I want it to be quite strict about how I've defined my projects in terms of the folder structure. So let's try and see if we can essentially add in some data. That's obviously the key point of this exercise as well, right? So we're gonna go to our Swagger file. Let's go to messages and we're gonna do this, try it out. And then try it out, we're gonna have a look at what we can do here. We're not gonna even add any filters, although we could. We're just gonna see what does a request look like. So execute. Then we actually get the request URL. We know that this works because it was just executed and it got us these results. Okay, so let's see if we can now make use of the data in our application. So let's try to ask the composer to set up our data fetcher and pull the data from our API. And then to avoid any issues, we're also going to explicitly specify that it's the messages endpoint that we're going to use. And I know from experience that sometimes these public APIs struggle a bit with the CORS. So I'm also going to just say that avoid CORS issues by setting up a proxy endpoint route that are, service, whatever we call it, public API service can use instead of calling the API directly. So let's try that, see if that works. Okay. So let's see. The agent will now obviously analyze the data. It pulled in the information. It already saw that this was the Norwegian Police API just based on the URL. And it's setting up our API route to proxy the request. So as you can see now, we've got a new folder here, API/police with a new file route. And this is where we're going to be calling the external endpoint and specifically the messages endpoint. So that's looking good. We're probably just going to hit accept already here. And then it's updating creating this public API service with types and data. So police API service, where it's defining the data that we're expecting to see. Now, probably it's making a mistake here because I know that there is no lat long information in this file, but let's keep going and see what it comes up with. And then now it's created the endpoint. Let's just click accept. And now it says, here's how you can start using this endpoint, or sorry, this service. So it's actually not taking it into use in our application. So probably the next step for us, let me just check one thing really quickly here. So what we want to do then is, the natural place to do this would be in our priority alerts widget. So here is probably the first place we're going to do it. So we can just say, let us make use of this data in our priority alerts component. Yeah, and what we want to do here is probably just show the last 10 incidents from the API. Okay, let's see what it does then. So that should be in this priority alert component. And hopefully it should then trigger this get recent incidents endpoint that it's created. And these endpoints, the composer has made for us, essentially in here. And you can see it makes this reference to the proxy API, which we set up here. So this route will be triggered, and then that route, the proxy, will then call the external API. So in this case, we have all of these convenience methods that it's created for us. And in particular, this one, recent high priority incidents. Now it's going to make some mistakes now because this is not the actual data we're going to get back. So let's see how far we're getting now. Priority alerts. Okay. So here it's making a change. It's adding in our API service that we got here. And then it's going to make use of that and trigger that. So it's probably not going to work on first try, but let's do it here anyways. Okay, so now you can use this component, priority alerts. And we already have our priority alerts in our API, in our dashboard. So we're just going to do our little refresh here to see. And it fails. But let's have a look at what we're actually getting back here. So I'm going to go into my route and I'm going to look at this. And then I'm going to see here we're getting our data back. And then just for the sake of it, we're going to do a little logging of that data to see if we're actually getting it. So another refresh. Here we go. We actually do get data. But it's just in a different format than what our current code created by Bolt is expecting. So we're just going to say, here is the data. Back from the API. And then let it update the code accordingly. And then hopefully we'll be able to show the data in our dashboard. So let's just hang on for 2 seconds. And then we'll be able to see it. So now it's updating the interface for the data, and we're going to accept that. And then let's have a look. Okay, so now we've updated the data, and then we're going to try to hit refresh. And there we go. Now we have live feed from the Norwegian police showing in our application. This would probably be a good place to actually stop, as now we have something working. We've got real data flowing in from the police API. But where's the fun in that? I know we probably set our ambitions a bit high for this project, and I feel a lot of demos are sort of ending after the Bolt prompt, and we probably could have done that in 10 minutes. Hey, look, we built something in 10 minutes, but I don't feel that's real because it's missing the plumbing and the electricity and the wiring, and I thought that was, interesting to see what would it take to actually do that. So probably we could have limited the scope a little bit, but yeah, I wanted to show something real. So let's crack on and make things a bit more interesting. And I thought we could now add a database and then finish up the map. And let's see how that goes. So we've got our incidents up and running, and it's live, showing us the live data. All right, so let's carry on. And for this last part, I wanted to essentially show you how we can make use of not necessarily the live API for this, but rather do a dump of the historical data. For simplicity, let's have a look at this one endpoint that I noticed, which is all the way down here. It's called messages all. Retrieves all messages. The CSV file is generated once daily. So this is something you could, fetch on a regular basis. Instead, I just clicked here, and that essentially downloads the CSV file to your computer. Something really cool, if you're not familiar with databases or anything like that, and that sounds intimidating, I'll show you a very quick method to do something very simple. This is obviously a flat file. It means that it essentially has no relations or anything like that. It's just everything in one structure. I'm gonna just go and open up Supabase, which you can start on a free version, and then I'm gonna show you. I've already set it up here, but just want to show you very quickly. since that's not really too difficult. So you can actually do new table. And then if you scroll down here, you can actually choose import data via spreadsheet. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to just drag this CSV file that we got from the police endpoint. It's called incidents CSV. So let's just do that here. And then you can see that it has this structure where it's got an ID, a thread ID, it's got a text field. This is in Norwegian. We've got our police district. We've got the category. So this is traffic, fire, accident. Then we've got the municipality and also a specific area within that municipality. And then we got the created on date and the updated date. And then we've got whether or not it's been edited or if it's currently active. So since this is historical data, we don't worry too much about these last parts. But what you can then do, as I said, create a table from CSV, which means that it'll automatically detect the table columns, essentially based on the spreadsheet. So here you can see this file contains 110,000 rows and these 12 columns. So if you click save, but I'm not going to do that since I've already done that, and I call it incidents. And there you go. You have everything in there. So that's super quick. You can then fetch your API key to access Supabase. So, and final little trick is to actually then take the table definition. So you click on the definition here, and then we're just gonna copy that so that we can use that in our next prompt. So let's carry on over here. So here now at this state, you could probably create a new composer because we've got a long history in this composer focused on debugging and fixing this API integration. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to create a new composer. I'm going to remove this context here. And now we want to eventually get some real data into our category charts. We're going to say, let us set up Supabase for our historical data following these instructions. And now I have a little trick that I would normally use. So I have a markdown file describing or essentially giving instructions for any project where I want to add Supabase. So I'm just going to drag that in here. And this file essentially is something that I would highly recommend exploring. Essentially, you can do this for migrations, for any sort of setup that follows a structure and you want to avoid any confusion or ambiguity for cursor. So this one essentially describes, here's how I would like to use Supabase. Don't worry about the details here. It also has some elements around authentication and login, which we're going to ignore for this particular case, since we're just going to access this data and assume it's a public data source, given that you have an access token. So I'm just going to leave that there, and I'm going to say, follow these instructions, and I'm just going to tag that file, because then that instructs it to follow those instructions. I'm just going to say, we are not going to add. And then I'm going to say, yeah, so we're going to just paste in our table definition. Table is already set up. I'm going to say that we have the following schema. Let's do that. And then, yeah, let's try that. Okay, so you can see now it's asking us to install Supabase SSR, and it's not proceeding until we run this command. So I'm just going to go ahead and run that command. Now it's also creating our database type definitions based on the schema we provided. So it's going to create this new file down here, created a new folder in lib Supabase, and it's now following the instructions where I say we want a server and a client to be able to access Supabase rather than create clients all over the place. So this is essentially just following my instructions. I'm just going to go ahead and accept everything right now. At this stage, it's not really making any changes to our existing code, essentially just adding in the Supabase connection. So you can see it's also created some queries for us already against Supabase. And then we've got our client, which is super easy. It's just using the SSR create browser client from Supabase. And we've got our server client from SSR, which we've wrapped nicely in this create client function for server components. Essentially does some basic cookie handling, etc. And then lastly, we've got our database schema set up based on the schema we provided. What we need to do is add the environmental variables, which I'm going to do. So now we've added our environmental variables. We're just going to restart our server here. And at this point, we're actually not going to see any changes to the front end because we're actually not using the connection for anything. So as you can see, it here says you can now use this function in your component, for example, in your category chart. And now I'm just going to say, help me add this to the category chart. So again, lazy and not wanting to write a single line of code. Let's see how far we can get. So now you can see that we've got some changes in our category chart file. Essentially, now we're using our incidents, get incidents method. So you can see this was what we created when we set up the Supabase connection. So get incidents, this one is essentially going to create a client against Supabase. If there are any filters provided to this method, it will apply those filters, and then it will eventually return the data. So I'm going to click accept just to get us going. You can see that we're getting some issues already here in the terminal for Supabase, our server. So it might have done something incorrectly here. So I'm just going to do this. So now we have no data available. I guess one issue we have here is that it's just assumed that we're only interested in active. But since we're now looking at historical data, most, if not all of those incidents are no longer active. So this one will essentially ensure that we're not getting anything back. I'm just going to take this equals part away and see if that helps. Now, these filters shouldn't really be applied because we haven't selected any filters. So let's just try and see if we're getting any more data now. Okay, so now we're at least getting some more debugging. Connection test result. So there we go. We actually get the data. Now, I expect that this might be, something related to the query, since we're getting 0 results down here. But let's just do this and say copy object. And I'm just going to say, here's the result. And then, yeah. Okay, so now we provided the actual format of our response. So now we can see actually it was it was already using our time filter here. So if I go back and actually do from July last year, so now we actually do get the right results. So that's working. All right, perfect. So that's pretty cool. So last part, now we're at the state where we have our live feed, we have our statistics, and now we're just missing our map. Okay, so let's see if we can make that happen as well. Let us now add our map, add our data to the map. So here I would like to specify a little bit more. So I know that there is no, and you can see that yourself here, there is no lat long information. So the only sort of map related reference we have is actually municipality. And so we're just gonna, this is a bit of a challenge for Cursor and for Claude, I guess we could say. Let's just say that we do not have lat long information. So let us make use of the municipality information. Because then we could group and then we can show it on the map. Yeah, so like a chloroplet map, but let's see if we can interpret that and come up with a suggestion. So yeah, it says we need a GeoJSON data for Norwegian municipalities. Let's go to ChatGPT and then just say, get GeoJSON data for Norwegian municipalities. Municipalities GeoJSON. That sounds spot on. Exactly. This is what we're looking for. So let's just accept and see what it actually looks like on the map right now. So it's actually added one here, which is just a square box, which is obviously not correct, but so you can see it's actually working in that sense that it's able to show something on the map. But let's give it the correct data. We're not seeing our municipality borders or anything like that. So let's just take a screenshot of that. And then we want to probably do some color coding based on few or a lot of incidents. And I'm just going to leave the screenshot in there for reference. Okay, so let's see what it can do now. So now you see it's added all of the different borders. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. And it's adding some color scales using blue. You can easily say, I would like other colors than that, of course. We can also change to our light mode, which was also implemented by Bolt when we set it up, since we specified we wanted dark and light mode. And then just gonna change our date. Whoa, there we go. Working. Amazing. All right. That's pretty cool, huh? So now you could add, obviously, a tooltip when you mouse over to see the name, and you can see, maybe you can ask it, say, let's show the latest incident from this municipality. There's a lot of opportunities here now. We managed to achieve quite a lot in a relatively short amount of time. And yeah, I think we're sort of really pushing the limits here with this case, and again, recommend breaking things down instead of doing everything in one go like we did here. But yeah, it's I thought it was pretty cool. So to recap, give enough context every time, every step. Provide enough context. So, and I don't think we really wrote a single line of code ourselves in this little experiment, which I think is pretty cool. It's not perfect, but it's I would say already 10x better than what was possible last summer. And maybe 100x better than what was available a year ago. And that's it. We managed to build a working MVP using real data from the Norwegian police. Looking at where we are today, I'm incredibly excited about what will be possible later this year if we sort of keep up this pace and keep pushing the boundaries like we are right now. So if you got value from watching this video and would like to see more Build With Me videos, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe. Drop a comment on what you would like to see me build next. Thanks for now, and stay tuned for next one.